Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here, back again with a daily dose of doom and gloom. Well, for once, there's nothing but good news to report today. The Fed called, the government called, everything's going to be just fine. So here's my advice for you today. I want you to turn this video off and I want you to go shopping, okay? But you got to promise me this. Promise me you're not going to use that money that you got tucked under your pillow or in the bank. It's very important that you put it on a high interest credit card. And it's very important, guys, that you don't buy stuff that you particularly need because you don't want to contribute to inflation. I don't want to see you buying guns, ammo, gold, precious metals, food, water, shelter, medical supplies, none of that stuff that's inflationary right now. I want you to buy things that you don't particularly need in order to fill that gaping hole in your heart that gets bigger and bigger by the day because we find ourselves in this hedonistic, self-serving, senescent society that's really on its deathbed. It's on its final legs, right? But that's all fine and dandy because everything's going to be fine if you can just keep on doing this. And it's very important that any disposable time you have left at the end of your very long workday that you're going to have to do to pay off all the interest, it's important that you burn that scrolling mindlessly, looking for some bit of relief in sludge content on TikTok, Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, and any time you have left after that, it's playing video games, it's playing with yourself, it's playing with someone else who you're not going to form a long-lasting, meaningful relationship with because you're just going to swipe right, then swipe left the next day. It's very important you do all this, okay? And don't concern yourself with the following because I've been told it's going to be fine. Let's just see what non-newsworthy things happen today. Okay, we have nuclear testing about to restart in Novaya Zemlya. Vladimir Putin said, you know what? If you guys aren't going to honor this, we're not going to either. So it's time to go back to where they detonated the Tsar Bomba back in the 60s, I do believe, the biggest nuclear bomb ever detonated. And we're going to start testing the nukes again because we are, of course, at the highest risk of nuclear war the world has ever seen. We have Poland preparing their borders for war. They are installing these anti-tank hedgehogs near the exclave borders of Kaliningrad, the Russian exclave, and on the Belarusian border. And this, of course, is because the Ukrainians are winning the war, right? And there's no reason to worry about the Russians ever going that far. So we're being told. We have Moldova preparing for the war as well because on the Transnistrian front, you know that breakaway part of Moldova, which is very pro-Russian. In fact, there's pro-Russian protests in Moldova today, apparently. Well, according to Russian intelligence, can't believe a word those guys say, right? The Ukrainians are getting ready to do some sort of invasion because there's 20,000 tons of ammunition there, one of the biggest ammo dumps in Eastern Europe, and they're running out of ammo and they need that ammo. So the Russians are saying that the Ukrainians are trying to concoct some sort of false flag operation to justify going into Moldova. Lo and behold, the Moldovans aren't big fans of having their sovereignty compromised, even if it is by a bunch of do-gooding Ukrainians. So let's see how this all plays out, shall we? It looks like the war is about to flare up in a major way. We have nuclear weapons facilities on fire in the United States, uranium facilities on fire. At the same time, we got trains being derailed, we got attacks on the grid, we got fires breaking out in various food processing plants. Maybe it's just confirmation bias, maybe it's just a coincidence, but it's starting to look like, you know, this could be an act of sabotage. Now, I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying it wouldn't really be hard when you have that giant unprotected border that millions of people come across every year, right? We have cyber apocalypse impending in 2023. This will be the black swan in 2023, I do believe. I was talking with Joel Salatin lately. Some of you guys probably know him. He's a lunatic farmer. He's all about self-sustainable farming, and we're going to be releasing that video this weekend. He has a lot to say about what's coming down the pike with respect to food shortages and just the contrived collapse of everything, if you want to call it that. And he was saying that it's very likely that what the WEF telegraphs is likely going to happen, okay? And I have to agree with them because prior to that thing that happened in 2020, there were these war games of sorts that were planning for that very thing. Now they're planning for a cyber attack, and they're saying that within the next 2 years, the likelihood of a catastrophic cyber attack is in the 90 to 100% range. So let's just wait for that. We have China is arming the Russians according to the CIA. Apparently, China has crossed a red line. Yes, you know that country with a $30 trillion GDP that makes everything, that holds a bunch of our debt? Apparently, they're beholden to us now. So they got to listen to everything we say. When we say jump, they got to jump. China is preparing for nuclear war through spying. Yes, not only the stratospheric balloons, but apparently now it's buoys. We had Balloon Gate, now we have Boy Gate. Like, am I saying it properly? Boy? Those things that float on the ocean, okay? Apparently they're using those to detect nuclear submarine movements. And one of those things just wound up on Japan's shores. And of course, one of the headlines was, did it come from outer space? Who knows? No, it's the Chinese preparing for World War III. The Chinese who we don't and haven't ever had any sort of strategic arms reduction treaties with. By the way, we have air raids in Russia. Millions of people were told they need to get into their shelters immediately. Turns out it was just a hack job, okay? It was a cyber attack. In fact, Putin's speech was hacked as well. So cyber attack is the name of the game nowadays. If I had to invest in any company right now, it might be that one with the crazy guy with the crazy hair, Palantir, is that what it's called? Because I have a sneaking suspicion that any sort of cyber security is going to be a good play in the years coming forward here. But what do I know? I mean, AI could change all this, right? We have a UN resolution for a Ukrainian peace deal, which was endorsed by the majority of countries, but a big fat so what? Because the UN, unfortunately, doesn't have an army to enforce anything. So it's a big nothing burger. And of course, China and India abstained from voting, which is the same way, it's basically saying that we don't care, right? We support Russia because they give us cheap gas and oil. We have food shortages in the UK that they're chalking up to some weather anomalies because, of course, Europe hasn't seen winter except one part of it, which unfortunately has seen too much winter. Speaking of winter, there's a major winter storm that's going to be blaring across the North American continent this week, and apparently it's leading to power outages, among other things. We got housing bubble 2.0 that is in the process of being popped. We have sperm counts dropping rapidly, even faster than before. A new study came out showing that depopulation is well underway. So we don't have to worry about this overpopulation thing anymore, apparently, because not only are people not having children by choice, they can't have them even if they wanted to. We have a cyber attack on the Dole food production company in North America. They are a very major player, and these are the types of things that we're going to see more and more of. And apparently they're discontinuing some aspect of the food stamp program come March. So cue the riots. Where should we start today? Let's start in Moldova, because I think that is the place which is going to flare up. I've been talking about this for the last few days, and it appears as though the shizzy's getting ready to royally hit the fizzy. Moldova urges calm. When they say this, you know that something's coming, because this is the exact same thing that the Ukrainians did. You know, everybody just be calm. It's going to be all right, right? The Russians aren't going to invade. The next day, oh, it's time to enact martial law. You go fight in the front lines. Anyways, Moldova urges calm after Russian threat over the breakaway region. Now, here's what's going on here, guys. Let's just get down to brass taxes. So we got a strip called Transnistria. You think if I had this map, I would find a way to highlight Transnistria, but it's one of the worst countries or breakaway regions to try to draw, because it's a very, very thin strip of land. And how am I going to do this here? Where are we? Yeah, it's like a thin strip of land that kind of comes down here. Anyways, it divides Moldova and Ukraine. It runs along a river. And there is this ammunition dump there, which holds 20,000 tons of ammunition. And that isn't it. That is the airport. So the ammunition dump is right up here. This is where it is. Here it is. This is Soviet-era weaponry. So this is ammo for all the weapons that Ukraine still uses, because they use mostly Soviet-era equipment, right? So they really do need this. They need this right here. And that's one of the motivations for them to take it over. But there's also talk that the goal of NATO is to open up a second war front to preoccupy the Russians, so that they have to use more resources to defend this region. Okay, now Moldova is saying, wait a minute, we don't want any help, Ukrainians. So those troops that you're amassing along the border here, I'm not sure which particular part of the border, but according to the Russians, this is where we get into the information confusion, is the Russians are saying that the Ukrainians are getting ready to send troops over the border, and this is where plausibility comes in. And I gotta say, it's a stretch if I'm the Russians saying this, and I'm somebody who's listening to the Russian story. They're saying that Ukrainians are going to get into Russian garb, Russian insignia, cross the border, and attack Ukrainians from Transnistria, thus providing justification for the Ukrainians to invade Transnistria. Now, Moldova has claimed, at least the current administration has claimed, that they want to demilitarize this region, okay? That the Transnistria is not an officially or internationally recognized state in and of itself. It's very much like Lugansk and Donetsk. They're breakaway republics of sorts, and they're just doing their own thing. And it's very pro-Russian. There's pro-Russian troops there, so it's very much an exclave of Russia. But it still technically belongs to Moldova, sort of, okay? Now, the Russians are saying that NATO is trying to goad them into another conflict so that they have this front open up, that they now have to deal with two fronts, obviously. So there is talk that as we speak, Russia is in the process of trying to get more troops into this region, because they only have, by the best accounts, 5,000 troops. The most conservative accounts, 1,500 troops in this region, okay? And Putin recently canceled the decree underpinning Moldova's sovereignty in the separatist conflict. So they now no longer acknowledge that Moldova is its own country, thereby setting the legal precedent for them to actually go in and potentially invade the country. Now, Moldova is a country of 4 million people with an army that isn't but 1/10 of Ukraine's, if that. But they do have some close ties with the Romanians, and this just brings the war closer to NATO. If the if the Romanians get involved, then that's a direct conflict with NATO. So let's see what they have to say here. This is according to the Russian state-sponsored media. So don't shoot the messenger. I'm just telling you what they're saying. Ukraine is preparing an armed provocation against the breakaway region of Transnistria in neighboring Moldova and plans to stage an attack by Russian troops from the territory of the unrecognized republic, according to the Russian Defense Ministry. As a pretext for the invasion, the staging of a supposed attack by Russian troops from the territory of Transnistria is planned. For this purpose, the Ukrainian saboteurs participating in the staged invasion will be disguised in the uniforms of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. You know, I mean, it's plausible because they probably got a lot of Russian uniforms. I mean, they think about how many people have died in this conflict. Now, I'm not saying that this is 100% true, but where there's smoke, there's definitely fire. And it appears as though the war is about to break out on that front. Now, if you guys don't think that this war is about to expand into World War III, why on earth is Poland installing these anti-tank barriers along the border here with Kaliningrad? That's this country right here, or this exclave. They're installing these things, these hedgehogs. I think this is a Czechoslovakian invention. And I've never understood why, like, couldn't the tank just, like, you know, tie a tow rope onto that thing and pull them away one by one? Or is it just to slow them down? Maybe you military guys can tell me what that's all about. Anyways, they got these things put up by border crossings by both Belarus and Kaliningrad. Speaking of Belarus, Belarus is going to be creating a volunteer force, they say, of 100,000 to 150,000 guys. Volunteer military force. Here's Lukashenko with a gun. Now, one thing, you know, we're told that these are like authoritarian dictatorships. And while that may be true, I'm looking at their gun laws, and I did not realize that Belarus has some of the most liberal, in the truest sense of the word, gun laws out there in Europe. Get a load of this. Citizens are allowed to only use bolt-action rifles and shotguns for hunting. Fair enough. But pistols and handguns may be carried in public for self-protection, and a pistol license is required to carry pistols in public. Can we do that in Canada? No, we can't even have pistols anymore. Jeez, maybe I should move there. Just for the firearms, of course. However, Belarusians are legally allowed to use weapons from any of the three classes. Oh, and they're also allowed to own assault rifles. I don't know if that's full autos or what, but they're very similar to what's going on in Switzerland. It currently ranks 4th in the world for gun ownership, below Yemen, topping Switzerland. So, interesting, isn't it? Very, very interesting. I wonder where the 2A guys are on that situation. We have the German Vice Chancellor giving some foreboding messaging here. I think Russia can only be brought to its knees on the battlefield. Sounds like World War III to me. Yes, indeed. I'm not trying to make light of this, guys. It's really just a coping strategy at this point. You consume so much of this content. It's just like, it's my God. We got Czech inflatable decoys. I'm not sure if you guys realize this, but they're using lots of inflatable decoys on the battlefield to exhaust and deplete Russia's missiles. And the Russians are also using this stuff as well. It's an interesting type of subterfuge that's being deployed in these high-intensity conflicts that are ensuing. We have the Moscow's envoy to the UN saying that Russian-EU relations no longer exist. There's not much time left, guys. There really isn't much time left. Putin's going to be boosting nuclear forces after suspending the nuclear arms treaty. We've been talking about how Russian nuclear forces are on one of the highest states of alert they can possibly be. There's a bunch of emergency action messages that have been going out. The problem with this nuclear stuff going on right now is that both sides are now on a hair trigger. So now that there's no more START treaty, and once Russia puts its forces on high alert, it becomes somewhat of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Because then you have the Americans have to go to a higher level alert. Then the Russians might interpret what the Americans are doing as, oh, we need to be even more ready. So DEFCON at some point becomes self-fulfilling. Anyways, Russia is ready to resume nuclear tests at Novaya Zemlya. Putin orders army to prepare nuclear tests, saying that the U.S. is creating new weapons. So this is one of their concerns. They're saying that it's actually the U.S. that is not following through with their obligations. Honestly, guys, right now, I do not believe a word that either side says. Take nothing at face value, because understand that in the age of satellites and where you can basically see everything from space or from stratospheric balloons or whatever the case, they have to lie through their teeth. So they're never, ever, ever going to tell you exactly what they're going to do. They're always going to say the complete opposite. Now, here's where it gets interesting, all right? This was the region here, this Novaya Zemlya. This is where they tested the Tsar Bomba. That was that 50 megaton bomb. And it says here, in fact, or let's just read this part. Yesterday, the very next day after the leader's message of basically canceling the New START treaty, the State Duma and the Federation Council unanimously approved a presidential bill to suspend Russia's participation in the START treaty. However, another significant point of Putin's speech was overlooked by many. He demanded that the Ministry of Defense and Rosatom Corporation ensure that the nuclear test site in the Arctic is ready for testing new types of weapons. And new types of weapons they certainly have, such as, and not limited to, they have the hypersonic weapons. They have the new Poseidon torpedoes, which can carry a 100 megaton warhead and cause a radioactive tsunami bigger than anything the world has probably ever seen since the dinosaurs were wiped out. They have the Skyfall system, which I think is still in the prototype phase, and that's a system that it's like a nuclear-powered plane that flies around nonstop and can potentially just, nosedive on any part of the planet that it needs to. They have the hypersonics that can be launched from land, sea, and air. They got super EMP weapons and just a whole menu of stuff, delightful stuff. This says here that since 1950, as many as 3 test sites have been operating on Novaya Zemlya. The most famous, of course, was the site in the area of Sukhoi Noscape. It was here, literally and figuratively, that weapons of monstrous destructive power were forged and honed. One of which, of course, was the Tsar Bomba, 50 megatons. If you haven't seen the video of the Tsar Bomba, they had to put a parachute on it because when it was dropped from the plane, they were worried that the pilots they couldn't escape fast enough as this thing was falling. So they had to put a parachute on it to slow it down. And that was, maybe that's why the sperm counts are dropping all around the world. Who knows? There was a blackout across Russia as state TV channels go down after a huge hack. Now, this is pretty important because this means that the United States or somebody, just burned a 0 day or 2 in order to do this hack. And that's a big hack, to be able to take down all of state TV. And the other one as well, the other hack that happened was Russians being told to rush to air raid shelters due to imminent missile attack after radio stations were hacked. Now, the Russians are known for having a proclivity for hacking, and they have a great team of hackers, and they've pulled off a variety of things, and perhaps they're saving some of their best weapons. They're holding those in reserve. But to see them get hacked like this is pretty significant, and what this all means is that the more we bring the fight to the Russians, the higher the likelihood of some sort of nuclear event is going to be. Okay, recall the other day I was talking about how the Russian ambassador was summoned over what's going on. She's still in Moscow, and I would be very concerned if they finally do expel her. That's when you know that things have deteriorated, to a point that they've deteriorated with most of Europe. Many of the Baltic states in particular, they've expelled all of their Russian diplomats, and there's no bilateral communication between either. So it's not looking good. Apparently, the U.S. is going to be releasing some intelligence on China's potential arms transfer to Russia. The thing with this situation that I think we need to understand is that China's support for Russia in terms of buying their oil is almost more important. So this is another situation where I don't think Russia particularly wants China to enter the war in the same way they don't want Belarus to enter the war. They don't want to destabilize or risk political instability. They want their allies to remain as strong as possible. So it makes no difference if China is buying their stuff and that Russia can just create more weapons themselves versus China, giving them weapons. I mean, maybe if it's a case of production, remember, China does have the biggest manufacturing facilities on the planet, and they have all the infrastructure, the human resources to generate weapons on a scale the world has just never seen. Okay, their naval shipbuilding facilities far exceed anything that the United States can achieve for a long, long time. I guarantee you by 2030, they're probably going to have more aircraft carriers than the USA. Not that they're going to matter, because they're going to be kind of obsolete when you think about hypersonic weapons and whatnots. This is just an interesting graphic from Statista here. How U.S. and Russian nuclear arsenals have evolved. Estimated nuclear warhead stockpiles of the United States. So you can see all these treaties. There's Cuban Missile Crisis, Non-Proliferation Treaty, SALT 1, SALT 2, Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, START 1, START 2, SORT, New START, all gone. No more treaties. Okay, so what they're thinking is that this is going to go up again. But the thing is that back here, at this period of time, the guidance systems weren't as good. The missile defense wasn't as good. So you needed quantity over quality. But now, this is why it's kind of redundant that we have less nukes, because now they're more targeted, they're more surgical. Sure, there's less chances of bringing about nuclear winter because you don't have to drop 10 nukes on New York, you only need to drop 1. But, you know, I mean, it's still going to amount to the same thing from a strategic standpoint anyways. We have North Korea test firing 4 more strategic cruise missiles. I think that just happened a couple hours ago. These things are just happening like so fast now. Like the news cycle is just like mind-boggling. I almost need that Neuralink so I can keep up with it. Trump is boasting about how he would end the Ukraine conflict immediately. One call to Moscow and Kiev. That's all it would take. You know, one call to resolve, 50 years of the Cold War. That's it. All I can say is that, remember when Trump went and he did the whole gesture where he crossed the demilitarized zone in the Koreas and he shook Kim Jong-un's hand. They, drank some pop, ate some chips and stuff like that, had a good time. Well, the following year, North Korea set off a record amount of missiles. And now they're on the brink of war. So all I'm saying is, remember, these guys are politicians, and they're going to say whatever it takes. I'm not saying that he wouldn't give it the old college try, and, maybe you need a person who's a bit more chaotic in their methods in order to create some sort of situation that is unique, that can't be created with the approach that we're taking right now. It's possible. I mean, quite frankly, anything is better than the path we're on now. Because the path we're on now is doomed, is absolutely destined to end in nuclear war, which is why everybody is talking about it. Now, do you notice that? Every single person, pundit, is talking about what we've been talking about for the last year. And it's good that people are finally waking up to these facts. But that just goes to show how many people are going to be truly behind the curve with this stuff. Okay, there's a lot of people who just, they're not going to get it until it's happened. And then, of course, they're going to be a huge drag on everybody else. This is why it's important that you, in as non-annoying fashion as possible, try to educate people around you about what's actually going on in the world. Okay, we have climate, conflict, and contagion all converging at one point in time. We have material scarcity. We have the developing world, which is requiring more and more energy. We have energy scarcity, which some people will contest. Regardless, it's going to be a factor moving forward. And we have people fighting over territories, okay? Because the soil is eroding, according to Joel Salatin. Make sure you tune into that video coming up this weekend. USA sending 200 troops to Taiwan as China tensions grow. What a great time to do that. I mean, what a great time to open up yet another war front. Let's send 200 more troops. Now, they have 30 troops there, I believe. Taiwan is having 540 of their troops trained in the United States right now. I'm presuming they're going to be officer class and above, so it's not like they're just training 500 guys for the front lines. Clearly, they're being trained in tactics and stuff like that. So that leads me to believe that this war could come potentially any day. I mean, this whole thing could just get wildly out of control real fast. The way the Russians and the Chinese are communicating so closely, and some of the language that the Chinese envoys are using is fairly aggressive. And it's a lot different than, what you see when you see Xi Jinping communicating. Him, and I think Putin does this as well, they get their ministers and their ambassadors to do a lot of the dirty work in terms of the speaking aggressively. If you really want to know what China thinks, don't listen to the president. Just like, whereas it's a little different in the USA because they'll tell you what they think. They'll say that, yeah, China, you can't send Only we can send weapons into this fight. You can't do that. That's not allowed. We make the rules. The golden billion makes the rules. All right. Israel's Netanyahu held meetings with the top brass on attacking Iran. And here's what they say. This is their ultimatum. Okay, this is the other war that's about to start. If the United States does not establish a credible military threat immediately, meaning they want the United States to threaten the Iranians militarily, okay? Either Israel will attack or Iran will have a nuclear weapon, which we will not allow under any circumstance. Now, understand, according to U.S. intelligence even, the Iranians don't have a nuclear weapon and they're not actively trying to make one. So what? You know, I mean, I guess they're not going to listen to that. They're not going to take that as an answer. They want a military threat from the Americans against the Iranians immediately. Apparently, there's some wild weather happening. I guess the UK gets a lot of its fruit and vegetables from the northern African and parts of the Middle Eastern regions, like in Turkey, and it's been slightly colder than normal there. Well, at the same time, Europe has missed winter. Let me see, I got my map here. No, I don't have my climate reanalyzer map up right now. But yeah, right now, all of the North America, record cold temps. On the East Coast, like most of the year, it's been record warm temps. And in Europe, there hasn't been winter, basically. Okay, this is an interesting infographic of what NATO can bring to bear. And it really ain't that much. NATO's eastern flank. NATO doesn't have an eastern flank. The whole purpose, the solitary purpose of NATO is to fight the Russians and to keep the Russians down, keep the Americans in, keep the Russians out, the Germans down, the Americans in. And here's how many troops they have. 10,000 here, another 10,000 there, 20,000 here. No more than, like a few 100,000 troops. Now compare that to, I mean, that's the entirety of NATO, okay? At least I guess that's their eastern flank, I should say. So, I mean, it's not as much as people think. But you got to ask yourself, why are they saving all the F-22s and the F-35s? And, why aren't they throwing all this stuff in the fight? They got thousands of Abrams tanks. They could easily send a few over there. I know some people are saying, well, yeah, but we got to, we need those here and here and here. And do you really? If this is as important of a war as they say it is, clearly they're trying to bankrupt the Russians. I get that. But it almost starts to look like they really are saving everything for the big fight. But the thing that makes no sense with that is that if you were ever to go to war with Russia on that level, it would just escalate to the nuclear level anyways. Like you would never have, I cannot envision a situation where you have this large conventional war with all of these troops here from NATO, with all of their, fifth generation fighter jets. Like I can't imagine a war like that ever ensuing. It would just go nuclear. So unless they think it won't, and unless Russia really is holding its best stuff in reserve. This is an interesting graphic. This is price changes of consumer goods ever since the year 2000. Look at the stuff that's been made cheaper. Cheaper TVs, cheaper toys, cheaper software, cheaper cell phones. You guys know the whole bread and circuses thing? When Rome was collapsing, they gave the people bread and circuses. Now look at these things that are going up in price. Okay, clothing, it's not like absolutely essential, but you need it. But it's kind of stabilized. Cars have gone up a little bit, well, like 30%. Household furnishings, again, these are still material things for the most part. But now look at the stuff that you actually need. Food and beverages, nearly up 100% since the year 2000. Housing, up nearly 100%. The housing bubble is massive right now. Childcare, up nearly 125%. Medical services, up 125%. College, that's going the way of the dinosaur with AI. I hope ChatGPT rips the phony baloney academic industrial complex a new one, because it deserves it more than anything. College tuition and fees, I mean, what kind of bubble is that? Hospital services up 220%. Everybody talks about the marvels of modern medicine and keeping us alive, yet you still have a lot of very unhealthy people walking around. Joel Salatin has a lot to say about that as well, and it's to do with the fact that our food is nutrient deficient. Anyways, we got the U.S. housing market losing $2.3 trillion in value. Everybody thinks, oh, that's terrible. But look at this. Okay, this is from the year 2000. Okay, it starts around 2000, and you have the housing bubble, and look at that, barely put a dent in it, right? Came down at its low point. What year was that? That was like 2011. Okay, that's when things hit a bottom, and you had Peter Schiff out there arguing with we are the 99% on Wall Street. Then things just go up this staircase. Look at this pattern here. What the hell happened there? I need some economists to explain what the hell happened. It was steady, a steady bubble. But then all of a sudden, and now people are worried, right, that it's just going to crash. It may well crash. Some people think it's already started. Look at this, though. This is gold, okay? Interesting parallel here with gold. It's clearly a lagging indicator. Like, this is when the housing thing happened, and this is when gold. So we know that gold, the interesting correlation here, and that's all it is that gold has went up in value by about 4 times, 400%. In the same time, housing has gone up nearly 400%. So, maybe it's just maybe the housing market isn't a bubble, and it's just the money is, worthless. We've lost like 75% of the purchasing power of the dollar in the last 20 years, which is scary considering that we're on the brink of de-dollarization. We got global sperm counts declining at accelerating new rates. So I think 50% of what it was 50 years ago, and it's declining by 2.3% a year. South Africa has been having these crazy blackouts, and there's actually naval exercises occurring between China, Russia, and South Africa. Go figure, BRICS nations working together. We got the WEF warning about a cyber apocalypse in 2023. I think that's going to be the black swan, guys. I think that's how it's going to start, because understand, the hybrid warfare, which we're still in the phase of, before it goes kinetic, Russia is going to unleash a major cyber attack on us. And that means that they could poison the water supply, they could take down the power grid. Remember, it only takes 9 transformers, 9 of the properly placed transformers, to take out the entire power grid. It has some sort of cascading effect, and you can actually disable the entire power grid. And where do we get our transformers from, or the parts? We get them from China, of course. What else do we need to talk about? I saved the best continent for last. Canada discovers Chinese boys. What the hell are Chinese boys doing in the Arctic? How do you say that word? Boys in the Arctic that could be tracking U.S. nuclear submarines. Now this is concerning, because recall, Huawei could intercept signals, right? There was concern about spy tech, and it all comes down to strategy and strategic arms. So Huawei could potentially interrupt the sending of emergency action messages from the generals to the nuclear triad. And now you have the stratospheric balloons, you have the boys, the Arctic boys swimming around out there. Must be cold swimming around. I'm sorry, guys, it's getting late. Really bad jokes. I'm not a comedian, okay? I know they called me the class clown in school, but I'm definitely not a comedian. But these things, this thing here, the media is making a big deal about this. Some people have even said, did it come from space? I don't know. They're trying to, play it up, the whole UFO thing. This actually landed on the beach. This should be over in Japan, because that's where they found it. It's made of metal, So people were concerned, was it a mine? Was it some sort of tracking device? They're saying it's hollow, so who knows? But regardless, it just goes to show that, this is what you would see before World War III. A major winter storm, they might even see a rare blizzard in California. Looming cuts to emergency SNAP benefits threaten food security because, of course, food prices have only risen and are only going to continue to rise. Now they're going to get rid of all the SNAP benefits, but we're going to send more money and weapons to Ukraine. Let's see how this plays out. I give it, this is going to be a hot summer. It's going to be the summer of rage. And if it isn't, people are really, really dumb. Dole North American production grinds to a halt after cyber attack. Seriously disrupted Dole's operations, causing a temporary shutdown of production plants and affecting food supplies. A lot of these cyber attacks are temporary or it's ransomware, but some can have long-lasting and permanent effects. And one of these days, they're going to get us, and everything is just going to coalesce at the wrong time into a big crap storm. U.S. uranium site catches fire. This is the nuclear processing facility at the Y-12 site in Tennessee. U.S. Department of Energy lists the building as a uranium processing facility, and it was for the purpose of enriching uranium to be used on nuclear weapons systems. Anyways, guys, as usual, not looking good. And, more good news. Boris Johnson is likely going to become NATO Secretary General. He's probably going to get the job. You remember him? The guy who was extremely hawkish. I think it was the first major leader to go to Kiev for the photo shoot thing. And, so Boris is getting bored in his retirement. Russian envoy to the UK announces the beginning of 10 years of serious changes in the world. Sounds like fun. That's a euphemistic way of saying it. U.S. support for the Baltics is unwavering, according to Lloyd Austin. Famous last words, guys. You heard it here first. They will leave you just like those Afghanistan guys hanging from the airplane. Never forget that scene. Keep that alive in your mind when the U.S. says, don't worry, we'll stick around to the end. Sure you will. Anyways, that's about all I got to say today. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe.